The year was 1847, and the dusty streets of Cedar Ridge had never seen anything quite like what was about to unfold. When the stagecoach pulled up to the town's only hotel that September morning, nobody expected the elegantly dressed woman who stepped down to be the same scrawny girl they'd driven out 13 years ago. But there she was, Emily Mae Watson, back to collect what was rightfully hers, and Lord help anyone who stood in her way. The townspeople gathered around the stage stop, whispering among themselves as they watched the mysterious woman adjust her fine silk gloves and straighten her emerald green traveling dress. Her dark hair was pinned up proper-like, and she carried herself with the kind of confidence that only came from having survived the worst life could throw at you. None of them recognized her yet, but they would soon enough. Emily Mae stepped onto the wooden boardwalk, her leather boots clicking against the weathered planks. The sound echoed in the morning air like gunshots, and folks started to take notice. She looked around at the familiar buildings, the general store where she used to buy penny candy, the church where she'd been baptized, the saloon where her daddy used to drink away his troubles. Everything looked smaller than she remembered, more run-down, like the whole town had been holding its breath waiting for something to happen. She pulled a folded letter from her reticule and glanced at it one more time. The lawyer's handwriting was clear as day. Property deed registered in name of Thomas Watson, passed to sole heir Emily Mae Watson upon confirmation of identity. 13 years she'd been waiting for this moment. 13 years of scratching and clawing her way up from nothing, and now she was back to claim what should have been hers all along. But first, she had some business to attend to with the good folks of Cedar Ridge. The morning sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Emily Mae made her way toward the heart of town. She could feel eyes on her from every window, every doorway. Word traveled fast in small towns, and she reckoned half the population would know about her arrival before she even reached the hotel desk to sign the register. "Can I help you, ma'am?" The hotel clerk was a young man, probably wasn't even born when she'd left. His voice cracked a little when he spoke, like he wasn't used to talking to ladies dressed so fine. "I'd like your best room," Emily Mae said, her voice steady and clear. "I'll be staying for a spell." The clerk fumbled with the registration book, his hands shaking slightly. "Yes, ma'am. Might I ask your name for the register?" Emily Mae smiled, and there was something in that smile that would have made a wise man take a step back. "Emily Mae Watson, but I reckon some folks around here might remember me by another name." The clerk's face went white as a sheet. He'd heard the stories, passed down from his older brothers and cousins. Stories about the Watson girl who'd brought shame on her family and been run out of town with nothing but the clothes on her back. Stories about how she'd been carrying another man's child at barely 13 years old, and how her own daddy had disowned her right there on Main Street for all to see. I reckon I'll get you that room right away, Miss Watson," he stammered, his hand trembling as he reached for the key. Emily Mae watched him with those sharp green eyes of hers, the same eyes that had seen too much too young. "Much obliged," she said, taking the key from his sweaty palm. "And son, you might want to spread the word that I'm back. Save folks the trouble of whispering about it all day." She made her way upstairs to her room, her footsteps echoing through the narrow hallway. The room was simple but clean, with a view of Main Street that let her keep an eye on the comings and goings below. She set her traveling bag on the bed and walked to the window, looking out at the town that had thrown her away like yesterday's garbage. 13 years ago, she'd been just a scared kid with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. Now she was a woman with more money than most folks in Cedar Ridge would see in their whole lives, and she had plans for every last one of them who'd stood by and watched her get cast out. The knock on her door came sooner than expected. Emily Mae opened it to find Mrs. Henderson, the preacher's wife, standing in the hallway with her hands folded in front of her, and a look on her face like she'd just swallowed something sour. "Emily Mae Watson," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice tight with barely contained emotion. "I thought I might be seeing you." "Mrs. Henderson." Emily Mae stepped aside to let the older woman into the room. "You're looking well." Mrs. Henderson's eyes swept over Emily Mae's fine dress, her polished boots, the gold watch chain visible at her waist. "I heard you were back in town. Folks are talking." "I imagine they are." Emily Mae closed the door and turned to face her visitor. Same as they were talking 13 years ago when you and your husband stood on that church steps and watched my daddy throw me out like I was nothing. The preacher's wife flinched. That was different. You were just a child, but what you'd done? What I'd done. Emily Mae's voice was quiet, but there was steel in it. I was 13 years old, Mrs. Henderson. 13. And that grown man who took advantage of me. He's still walking around this town like he owns it, ain't he? Mrs. Henderson's face flushed, red. That's not... We don't speak of such things. No, you don't. Emily Mae walked to the window and looked out at the street below. You don't speak of how Benjamin Crawford, respected businessman and pillar of the community, forced himself on a little girl. You don't speak of how he threatened to hurt my family if I told anyone. You just let everyone believe I was some loose girl who brought shame on herself. The silence stretched between them like a taut rope. Mrs. Henderson shifted uncomfortably, her hands working at the fabric of her dress. What do you want, Emily Mae? She finally asked. Emily Mae turned back to face her. Justice. The kind your husband preaches about every Sunday, but seems to forget when it comes to protecting children in his own congregation. Mrs. Henderson's eyes widened. You can't mean to, after all these years. Oh, but I do. Emily Mae's smile was cold as winter wind. I've got witnesses now, people who'll testify to what they saw, what they knew, and I've got the resources to make sure the truth comes out, no matter how many important men try to keep it buried. The preacher's wife stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the wooden floor. Emily Mae, you need to think about what you're doing. This town has moved on. People have forgotten. Have they? Emily Mae's voice was soft, but there was venom in it. Then why did that hotel clerk turn white as a ghost when I said my name? Why are you up here trying to talk me out of something I haven't even done yet? Mrs. Henderson moved toward the door, her face pale. Some things are better left in the past. For who? For Benjamin Crawford? For all the good folks who stood by and let an innocent child get thrown away to protect a grown man's reputation? Emily Mae shook her head. No, ma'am. Some things need to be dragged into the light, no matter how much they might hurt. After Mrs. Henderson left, Emily Mae sat down at the small writing desk by the window and pulled out a sheet of paper. She had letters to write, people to contact. The wheels of justice moved slow, but they did move, especially when you had enough money to grease them properly. She'd spent 13 years preparing for this moment, 13 years of working her way up from nothing, learning to read and write proper, making connections with the right people. She'd married a good man who'd died too young and left her with more money than she knew what to do with. She'd raised her daughter to be strong and independent, never letting her forget where she came from or what had been done to her mother. And now it was time to come home. The next morning, Emily Mae dressed carefully in her finest black dress and made her way to the Crawford General Store. The bell above the door jingled as she entered, and she saw Benjamin Crawford himself behind the counter, his hair gone gray, but his face still bearing the same arrogant expression she remembered. He looked up when she entered, and she watched the recognition dawn in his eyes. His face went pale, then red, then pale again. Emily, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Crawford. She walked slowly toward the counter, her heels clicking on the wooden floor. I'm surprised you remember me. Crawford's eyes darted toward the door, as if he was thinking about running. What are you doing here? I've come back to settle some old business. Emily Mae placed her hands on the counter and leaned forward slightly. I believe you and I have some things to discuss. I don't know what you're talking about. But his voice shook when he said it, and sweat was beading on his forehead. Emily Mae smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant sight. Oh, I think you do. I think you remember exactly what you did to a 13-year-old girl 13 years ago, and I think you remember how you threatened her family to keep her quiet. Crawford looked around the store, making sure they were alone. That was a long time ago. Things were different then. Different how? Different because you were a grown man and I was a child? Different because you had power and I had none? Emily Mae's voice was getting louder, and Crawford shushed her frantically. "Keep your voice down," he hissed. "People will hear." "Good. Let them hear." Emily Mae stepped back from the counter. "In fact, I think the whole town should hear about what Benjamin Crawford did to Emily Mae Watson when she was just 13 years old." Crawford came around the counter quickly, his face desperate. "Emily, please, I have a family now, a wife, children. I can't what? Tell the truth?" Emily Mae's eyes flashed with anger. "The same truth you made sure never came out. 13 years ago when you let everyone believe I was some loose girl who brought shame on herself." "I'll pay you," Crawford said suddenly. "Whatever you want. Name your price." Emily Mae laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think this is about money? You think you can just buy your way out of what you did, like you bought your way out of it back then?" Crawford's face crumpled. "Please, Emily, my family doesn't know. My children, your children." Emily Mae's voice was deadly quiet. "What about my child? The one I had to give birth to alone because you made sure I had nowhere to go? The one who's had to grow up knowing her mother was thrown out of town like garbage because of what you did?" Crawford sank down behind his counter, his head in his hands. "I was young. I made mistakes. You were 32 years old, Benjamin Crawford. 32, and I was 13. Emily Mae's voice cut through the air like a blade. "That wasn't a mistake. That was a crime." The bell above the door jingled again, and Sheriff Morrison walked in. He was older now, grayer, but Emily Mae recognized him immediately. He'd been the one to escort her to the edge of town all those years ago, making sure she didn't come back. "Morning, Ben," the sheriff said, then stopped when he saw Emily Mae. His face went through the same series of expressions as everyone else's: confusion, recognition, then fear. "Emily Mae Watson," he said slowly. "Sheriff Morrison." Emily Mae turned to face him, still keeping the peace in Cedar Ridge, I see. Morrison's hand moved instinctively toward his gun, then stopped. "What brings you back to town?" "Just visiting old friends," Emily Mae said pleasantly. "Catching up on old times." The sheriff looked between her and Crawford, who was still crouched, behind his counter looking like a whipped dog. "Maybe we should talk, Emily Mae. Outside." "I don't think so, Sheriff. I think we should all talk right here, where everyone can hear." Emily Mae's voice carried clearly through the store. "About what really happened 13 years ago. About how a grown man forced himself on a child and then used his money and influence to make sure she took the blame for it." Morrison's face went red. "Now see here, Emily Mae." "No, you see here." Emily Mae's voice was like ice. "I've got witnesses now. People who saw what happened, people who were too scared to speak up back then but aren't scared anymore. I've got lawyers in Denver who are very interested in this case, and I've got enough money to make sure the truth comes out, no matter how deep you try to bury it." The store had gone completely silent. Crawford was still behind his counter, and Morrison was standing frozen in the doorway. Emily Mae looked at both of them, these men who had destroyed her childhood and thought they'd gotten away with it. "I'll be staying at the hotel for a few more days," she said calmly. "I suggest you both think real hard about what you want to do next." She walked toward the door, her head held high. As she passed Sheriff Morrison, she stopped and looked him in the eye. "By the way, Sheriff," she said quietly, "I've already sent letters to the territorial governor and the federal marshal in Denver. They're very interested in hearing about how justice works in Cedar Ridge." She left them standing there and walked out into the morning sunshine. Word would spread quickly now. By noon, everyone in town would know that Emily Mae Watson was back, and she wasn't the scared little girl they'd thrown away 13 years ago. As she walked down Main Street, Emily Mae saw faces in windows, people ducking into doorways to avoid her. The fear was spreading like wildfire, and she was glad. Let them all worry about what she might do, what she might say. Let them all remember what they'd done, and wonder if their time was finally up. She made her way to the cemetery on the hill outside town. It took her a while to find the grave she was looking for, a simple wooden cross with Thomas Watson carved into it. Her father's grave, the man who'd thrown her out without even listening to her side of the story. "Hello, Daddy," she said quietly, standing in front of the grave. "I'm back." The wind rustled through the grass around the headstone. Emily Mae knelt down and placed a single white flower on the grave. "I know you thought you were doing right," she said. "I know you thought you were protecting the family name. But you threw away your own daughter to protect a man who hurt her, a man who threatened to hurt all of us if the truth came out." She stood up and brushed the dirt off her dress. "I forgive you, Daddy. But I ain't forgetting what you did. And I ain't letting it happen to anyone else." As she walked back toward town, Emily Mae saw a familiar figure waiting for her by the cemetery gate. It was Mary Sullivan, her old friend from school. Mary looked older, worn down by years of hard work and worry, but her eyes lit up when she saw Emily Mae. "Emily Mae, is it really you?" Emily Mae smiled, and this time it was genuine. "Hello, Mary." Mary threw her arms around her old friend, tears streaming down her face. "I can't believe it. After all these years, I heard you were back, but I couldn't believe it was true." "It's true." Emily Mae hugged her back. "I'm here." Mary pulled back and looked at her, taking in the fine dress, the confident bearing. "Look at you. You look like a queen." "I look like a woman who's had to fight for everything she's got," Emily Mae said. "But I'm doing all right." Mary's face grew serious. "Emily Mae, people are saying you're here to cause trouble. They're saying you're going to stir up old business that's better left alone. What do you think, Mary? Do you think what happened to me should be left alone?" Mary looked down at her hands. "I always knew it wasn't your fault. I tried to tell people, but nobody wanted to listen. They said you must have done something to encourage him." Emily Mae felt a familiar anger rising in her chest. "I was 13 years old, Mary. What could I have possibly done to encourage a grown man? I know. I knew then, and I know now." Mary looked up at her friend. "But Emily Mae, Crawford's got a lot of power in this town. His family's got money, influence. If you try to go up against him, let me worry about that." Emily Mae's voice was firm. "I'm not the scared little girl I used to be. I've got power now, too." Mary nodded slowly. "I can see that. But be careful, Emily Mae. There's people in this town who'd do anything to keep their secrets buried." They walked back toward town together, talking about old times, about mutual friends who'd moved away or died, about the changes that had come to Cedar Ridge over the years. But underneath the pleasant conversation, Emily Mae could sense Mary's worry, her fear that stirring up the past would only bring more pain. That evening, Emily Mae sat in the hotel dining room, eating her supper alone. The other patrons kept glancing at her, whispering among themselves. She could feel their eyes on her, could hear the low murmur of their conversations. She was used to being talked about, but this felt different. This felt like a reckoning. She was just finishing her meal when a young woman approached her table. She was pretty, with dark hair and Crawford's distinctive blue eyes. Emily Mae's heart clenched when she realized who it must be. "Excuse me," the young woman said. "Are you Emily Mae Watson?" Emily Mae set down her fork and looked up at her. I'm Margaret Crawford, Benjamin Crawford's daughter." The dining room went quiet. Everyone was straining to hear what would happen next. Emily Mae studied the young woman's face. She couldn't be more than 18 or 19, about the same age Emily Mae had been when she'd finally found her footing in the world. Margaret had her father's eyes but her mother's gentle mouth, and she looked nervous but determined. "What can I do for you, Miss Crawford?" Margaret glanced around the dining room, then back at Emily Mae. "Could we speak privately?" Emily Mae nodded and stood up. "We can talk in my room." They made their way upstairs in silence, ignoring the whispers that followed them. Once they were in Emily Mae's room with the door closed, Margaret sat down heavily, in the chair by the window. "I know why you're here," she said quietly. Emily Mae raised an eyebrow. "Do you?" "I've heard the stories about what my father did to you when you were young." Margaret's voice was steady, but Emily Mae could see her, hands shaking. "I've heard them all my life," whispered when people thought I wasn't listening. Emily Mae sat down on the bed, facing her. "And what do you think about those stories?" Margaret was quiet for a long moment. I think my father is a good man who made a terrible mistake when he was younger. But I also think you were just a child, and what happened to you wasn't fair. Emily Mae felt some of her anger soften. Your father didn't just make a mistake, Margaret. He hurt me in ways that took me years to recover from. And then he used his power to make sure I was blamed for it. I know. Margaret's voice was barely above a whisper. I've seen how he acts when your name comes up. I've seen the guilt in his eyes. But you still love him. He's my father. Margaret looked up at Emily Mae. But that doesn't mean I think what he did was right. And it doesn't mean I think you should stay quiet about it just to protect him. Emily Mae was surprised by the young woman's honesty. What do you want from me, Margaret? I want to know what you're planning to do. Are you going to destroy him? Destroy our family? Emily Mae was quiet for a long moment, thinking. I'm planning to tell the truth. What happens after that isn't up to me. Margaret nodded slowly. I understand. And I want you to know that if you tell your story, I won't stand against you. I won't help my father cover it up. Emily Mae felt a rush of respect for the young woman. That's very brave of you. It's the right thing to do. Margaret stood up. I should go. But Miss Watson, Emily Mae, I want you to know that I'm sorry. For what my father did to you, for what this town did to you. You deserved better. After Margaret left, Emily Mae sat alone in her room thinking about the conversation. She'd expected Crawford's family to rally around him, to defend him at all costs. But his own daughter was willing to let the truth come out, even if it destroyed her father. Maybe there was more hope for justice than she'd thought. The next morning brought a knock at Emily Mae's door. She opened it to find a well-dressed man in a fine suit, with a briefcase in his hand. Miss Watson? I'm James Parker, attorney. At law, I represent Mr. Crawford. Emily Mae stepped aside to let him in. I figured you'd show up sooner or later. Parker sat down and opened his briefcase. My client is prepared to make you a very generous offer to settle this matter quietly. Emily Mae sat across from him. How generous? $10,000. Cash. All you have to do is leave town quietly and never speak of this matter again. Emily Mae laughed. $10,000. That's what you think my silence is worth? Parker looked confused. It's a very generous offer, Miss Watson. More money than most people see in a lifetime. Mr. Parker, I've got more than $10,000 in my jewelry box upstairs. I don't need your client's money. Parker's face changed as he realized he wasn't dealing with a desperate woman who could be bought off. What do you want then? I want your client to stand up in front of this whole town and admit what he did. I want him to apologize for the harm he caused, and I want him to face the consequences of his actions. That's impossible. The statute of limitations. The statute of limitations for rape of a child? I don't think so, Mr. Parker. Emily Mae's voice was cold. And even if there were legal limitations, there's no statute of limitations on the truth. Parker packed up his briefcase quickly. I'll relay your response to my client. You do that. That afternoon, Emily Mae made her way to the church. It was Wednesday, and she knew there would be a prayer meeting. She wanted to see how the good Christian folks of Cedar Ridge would react to her presence in their holy place. The church was nearly full when she arrived. Conversation stopped as she walked down the aisle and took a seat in the front pew. She could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on her, could hear the whispers starting up behind her. Reverend Henderson took the pulpit and began to speak about forgiveness, about letting go of past hurts and moving forward in Christian love. Emily Mae listened to his words, but she could see the sweat on his forehead, could hear the tremor in his voice. He was nervous, scared of what she might do. When he finished his sermon, Reverend Henderson asked if anyone had anything they'd like to share with the congregation. Emily Mae stood up. I'd like to say something, she said clearly. The church went dead silent. Reverend Henderson looked like he wanted to refuse, but with the whole congregation watching, he couldn't very well deny her the chance to speak. Buck, floor is yours, Miss Watson. Emily Mae turned to face the congregation. She saw faces she recognized from her childhood, people who'd watched her grow up, people who'd known her family for generations, and she saw the fear in their eyes, the guilt, the shame. 13 years ago, I was driven out of this town in disgrace, she began. I was 13 years old, pregnant, and alone. My own father disowned me, and not one person in this congregation stood up to defend me. She paused, letting her words sink in. You all believed I was a loose girl who'd brought shame on herself. You believed that because it was easier than believing the truth, that a respected member of this community had forced himself on a child. Someone in the back of the church stood up. This is not the place for such talk, a man's voice called out. Emily Mae turned toward the voice. Isn't it? Isn't the church exactly the place to talk about truth? About justice? About protecting children? She looked back at the congregation. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for justice. I'm here to make sure that what happened to me never happens to another child in this town. Reverend Henderson stepped forward. Miss Watson, perhaps we could discuss this privately. No, Emily Mae's voice rang out clear and strong. I've been quiet for 13 years. I've been private for 13 years. Now it's time for the truth to come out in the light, where everyone can see it. She walked toward the door, then turned back, one more time. I'll be at the hotel for 2 more days. If anyone in this congregation has something to say to me, an apology, a confession, anything, you know where to find me. The next morning, Emily Mae was surprised to find a line of people waiting outside the hotel. Word of her speech at the church had spread, and it seemed like half the town wanted to talk to her. The first person in line was Mrs. Johnson, who'd been a neighbor when Emily Mae was growing up. She was crying when she approached Emily Mae's table in the hotel lobby. Emily Mae, I'm so sorry, she said through her tears. I knew something wasn't right about what happened to you, but I was too scared to say anything. I should have stood up for you. Emily Mae reached across the table and took the older woman's hand. Thank you for saying that, Mrs. Johnson. It means more than you know. One by one, people came forward, some to apologize, some to confess that they'd suspected the truth but hadn't acted on it, some to offer their support for whatever Emily Mae planned to do next. Not everyone was supportive. There were still plenty of people who thought she should let sleeping dogs lie, but more people believed her than she'd expected. The most surprising visitor was Benjamin Crawford himself. He showed up at her door that evening, looking haggard and defeated. Emily, he said when she opened the door, I need to talk to you. She let him in and closed the door behind him. He stood in the middle of her room looking like a broken man. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I know that doesn't mean much after all these years, but I needed to say it. I'm sorry for what I did to you. I'm sorry for what I let happen to you afterward. I'm sorry for all of it. Emily Mae studied his face. Are you sorry because you got caught? Or are you sorry because you hurt me? Crawford's face crumpled. Both. I've been living with the guilt of what I did for 13 years. Every time I look at my own daughter, I think about how I hurt someone else's daughter. I think about how I destroyed your childhood. You did destroy it, Emily Mae said quietly. You took away my innocence, my trust, my family. You made me believe I was worthless, that what happened was my fault. I know, and I'm sorry. Crawford looked up at her. What can I do? How can I make this right? Emily Mae was quiet for a long moment. You can tell the truth. You can stand up in front of this town and admit what you did. You can make sure everyone knows that I was innocent, that I was a victim, not a willing participant. Crawford nodded, slowly. I'll do it. I'll tell them everything. When? Sunday. At church, in front of the whole congregation. Emily Mae felt a weight lift from her shoulders. And you'll face whatever consequences come from that? Yes. Whatever happens, I'll face it. It's time. Sunday morning came bright and clear. The church was packed, with people standing in the aisles and spilling out onto the front steps. Word had spread that something important was going to happen, and nobody wanted to miss it. Emily Mae sat in the front pew, wearing her finest dress. She looked calm and composed, but inside her heart was racing. This was the moment she'd been waiting for, the moment when the truth would finally come out. Reverend Henderson began the service with a prayer, then invited Benjamin Crawford to come forward. Crawford walked slowly to the pulpit, his face pale but determined. He looked out at the congregation, then down at Emily Mae. "Friends," he began, his voice shaking, "I have something I need to confess to you all. Something I should have confessed 13 years ago." The church was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Crawford took a deep breath and continued. 13 years ago, a young girl in this community was driven out in disgrace. She was pregnant, and everyone assumed she was too. Blame for her condition. But the truth is, I was to blame. I forced myself on Emily Mae Watson when she was just 13 years old. I threatened her family to keep her quiet. And when she was thrown out of town, I let it happen because I was too much of a coward to admit what I'd done. Gasps echoed through the church. Some people started to whisper, but Crawford held up his hand. "I've lived with this guilt for 13 years. I've watched my own children grow up knowing that I'd hurt someone else's child. I've prospered in this community while the girl I'd wronged suffered for my crimes." He looked directly at Emily Mae. Emily Mae Watson was innocent. She was a victim. And I am the one who victimized her. Crawford stepped down from the pulpit and walked over to where Emily Mae was sitting. He knelt down in front of her, in full view of the entire congregation. "Emily Mae, I'm sorry. I'm so very sorry for what I did to you. I'm sorry for the pain I caused, for the years you lost, for the innocence I took from you. I know my apology can't undo the harm I've done, but I wanted you to hear it in front of everyone." Emily Mae looked down at the broken man kneeling before her. She thought about the scared 13-year-old girl she'd been, the years of struggle and pain, the long journey to where she sat today. She thought about forgiveness, about justice, about what it meant to be free. "I accept your apology, Benjamin," she said quietly. "And I forgive you." The congregation erupted in whispers and shocked exclamations. Some people were crying. Others were shaking their heads in disbelief. But Emily Mae felt something she hadn't felt in 13 years. Peace. Sheriff Morrison stepped forward. "Benjamin Crawford, you're under arrest for the rape of a child." Crawford stood up and held out his hands for the handcuffs. "I understand, Sheriff." As Crawford was led away, Emily Mae stood up and faced the congregation. "I want to thank all of you who supported me this week. And I want to remind you that there may be other children in this community who need your protection. Don't let fear or social standing keep you from speaking up for those who can't speak for themselves." She walked out of the church with her head held high, followed by the murmur of dozens of conversations. Her work in Cedar Ridge was done. The next morning, Emily Mae packed her bags and prepared to leave. She'd gotten what she came for: justice, truth, and the vindication she'd waited 13 years to receive. But as she was loading her trunk into the stagecoach, she heard a familiar voice. "Emily Mae, wait." She turned to see Margaret Crawford running toward her, tears streaming down her face. "I wanted to thank you," Margaret said breathlessly, "for giving my father the chance to tell the truth, for letting him make things right, even though it cost him everything." Emily Mae put her arms around the young woman. "Your father did the right thing in the end. That takes courage. What will happen to him? I don't know. That's up to the law now. But Margaret, your father's actions don't define you. You can choose to be better, to do better." Margaret nodded. "I will. I promise." As the stagecoach pulled away from Cedar Ridge, Emily Mae looked back at the town one last time. It looked smaller than ever, like a place that belonged to her past, rather than her future. She'd left it as a broken child and returned as a strong woman. She'd found her justice and her peace. The road ahead stretched out before her, leading back to her real life, her daughter, her future. She'd kept her promise to that 13-year-old girl who'd been thrown away. She'd come back for her, fought for her, and finally set her free. Cedar Ridge disappeared behind a hill, and Emily Mae Watson smiled as she looked toward home. Let us know how the story feels now. How's the flow? How's the writing? Share your thoughts in the comments and help us grow. Thank you for being here.